A devastating loss leads to 3 lost years. I'm Stephen Schomler. Welcome to episode 4 of my 6-part series, Pursuing the Life My Heart Longed For. This is episode 4. If you haven't yet watched the 3 preceding episodes, I encourage you to do it. There's also an episode 0 that gives an overview of this series. But let's dive right in. Where episode 3 left off, it was January 6, 2015. It was the day that I ditched my day job. It was a wonderful, exciting, fantastic day. A little bit of terrifying, but a lot of joy at the same time. Now, I'd mentioned in the previous episode that in August of 2013, I got a day job that I hated, but I really was grateful for the paycheck, and I was putting 40 hours a week into that day job. And a couple weeks later, also in August 2013, I got my first book contract. And to get that book contract done in time and to keep building my brand, I ended up working 40 hours a week at my day job and 40 to 60 hours a week at my big-time side hustle. And so when I got to January 6, 2015 and I was able to ditch that day job, one of the really incredible positive changes I was able to make is I went from working 80 to 100 hours a week to working just 30 to 60 hours a week. Man, that was fantastic. So let's move ahead in our timeline to the fall of 2015. Now in the summer of 2015, my second book had come out. It sold really well. I was able to get my third book contract. So summer of 2015, I'm writing my third book. I'm already talking to the publisher about the 4th and 5th book. We're working on a series. Things are going really well. I'm super excited. And this is where this episode gets rough. So just giving you fair warning. As many of you know, February 8th, 2016, that was the day that the wheels completely came off for me. It was just a brutal day. That was the day, that was the evening, February 8th, 2016, that I lost my 17-year-old son, Zane Stephen Schomler. And I'll tell you, that night just wrecked me. It was just brutal. You know, I call it my third great disaster. And to me, a great disaster is a personal experience that hits you so hard, it knocks you down so hard, you don't know if you'll ever be able to get back up again. It hits you so hard, you're not sure you're going to survive. And for me, you know, I didn't know how I was going to make it through that. That was such a brutal loss. More than I ever could have imagined. It was absolutely horrific for me. All of the creative momentum I had, I'd mentioned the fall of 2015, all of the creative momentum I had, I absolutely lost it. I could not finish that third book. Eventually the publisher, you know, we just can't wait anymore. You know, they canceled the contract. That was a heartache for me, but there was nothing I could do about it. I don't know how I survived financially self-employed that first year after Zane passed away, because there was months where I just could hardly do anything. Let me give you an idea what it's like when you lose a child. You know, in the United States, in English, when you are a child and you lose your parents, we call you an orphan. When you are married and you lose a spouse, we call you a widow or widower. But when you are a parent and you bury a child, that is something so awful, we don't even have a name for it. That's how awful it is. Now, I mentioned in episode 1 that I spent 10 years in the nonprofit world, and one of the things I did a lot of teaching of in the nonprofit world, I taught about grieving. And now here I was going through in a situation where I absolutely had to grieve, and I was having to apply my own teachings right to my own journey. And I have to tell you, grieving is how you heal. If you've had a loss, you have to grieve it. And we do such a bad job in this country culturally teaching people about grieving and talking about grieving. And I'm going to tell you something that may sound a little funny, but there's a tremendous amount of truth to it. It's okay if you laugh, but there's a lot of truth to it. Grieving is like going to the bathroom. When you don't do it, bad things happen. And yeah, that's kind of funny. It kind of rolls off the tongue, but that is so incredibly true. You know, I've been around people that have had a horrific loss and they have not grieved it, and I can just feel it stuck in there. I'm an intuitive person. I can feel it radiating off of them. So I'm going to let you know a few things about grief. One, you can't quantify grief. If the greatest loss in your life is losing a pet you've had for 15 years, that's the greatest loss in your life, and you have got to grieve. And you can't say, well, you know, Stephen lost a son, I just lost a pet. The greatest loss in your life is the greatest loss in your life, and you have to grieve it. Another thing that people, they don't, when you grieve, you end up having to cry. And grieving is how you heal, and crying is one of the ways you heal. And I'm around a lot of people, they don't want to cry because they're afraid of what will happen. Let me tell you the worst thing that can happen with your crying. And it's not the next thing I'm going to talk about that people think, but here's the worst thing that can happen. You can have what I call that ugly cry, where you start crying really hard, and maybe you try to get to the bed and you can't even make it onto the bed, so you fall down on the floor and you're crying and you're sobbing and horrible noises are coming out and snot bubbles are coming out your nose, and you kind of almost scare yourself with how hard you're crying. And I call it that ugly cry. True story, I tried to buy snotbubbles.com to explain that experience, and someone already owned it, so I bought that uglycry.com. But that's the worst that happens with crying, is that you have that kind of experience. But here's what doesn't happen. I run to people all the time when I talk about grieving, talk about loss, say, oh no, Stephen, I can't start grieving that horrible thing that I've been through. And I'm like, look, I've been through 3 great disasters that I needed to grieve and cry. You got to grieve yours. Oh no, I can't. I'm afraid that if I start crying, I will never be able to stop. Let me tell you, that's just not true. Because you can only cry hard for so long, and then your body just wears out. You physically are out of gas, you're out of energy, and you just can't do it anymore. Now, you may need to do that 2 or 3 more times, but it may be a week or 2 or 3 before you have the strength to do it again. So if you do feel like, oh, if I start crying that loss of this or the loss of that, I'll never stop, it's just not true. You may wear yourself out and fall asleep, or you may just be middle of the day and like, okay, I've been crying all morning and I'm just out of gas, I can't do it. Maybe you can't do anything else that day, but you won't keep crying forever. That's just not how it works. So as ugly and unpleasant as crying like that is, I just want to encourage you to cry if you need to. If you've had losses, I want to encourage you to grieve. And I want to give you some hope. I'm working on a series about my 3 great disasters. It'll be 1 video for each of my great disasters, a video about my dark childhood, a video about the homelessness and financial ruin situation I mentioned in episode 2 or episode 3, and then I'm going to make a video about losing Zane. And then I've got a companion video that I've already filmed. It'll be a Spark to Bonfire video that kind of goes with, those will be Stephen's story videos, personal stories about my great disaster. But I've already filmed a companion Stephen's story video. You can battle back, because if you've been through a great disaster, if you've been through a horrific loss, you can battle back from that. You can heal from that. But particularly if it's a loss, one of the ways that you're going to heal, one of the ways you're going to battle back is to grieve. Now, I still grieve Zane to this day. It's been 7 years since I lost him. I miss his incredible smile. I miss him telling me, so many times he told me, you're doing great, Dad, just keep going. Summer 2011, I decided to change my life, and so many people attacked me, friends and family. I told them I couldn't do it. And Zane was one of the few people that said, oh man, you can do it, Dad. He went with me on many weekends, in the fall of 2014, the fall of 2013, helping me work on my first book. We'd go on food cart adventures. I'd work my crappy day job during the week, and on the weekends we'd head off and take photos and do a lot of photo shoots together. It was such a joy to have him with me, and I miss him. I miss him so much. But my grieving has changed. Do I still miss him? Yes. But do I grieve as hard now in year 7 as I did in year 1? No. And some years are harder than others. Now, for some of Zane's family members, his birthday is very rough for them. His birthday doesn't impact me as far as grieving does. But some years, the anniversary of his passing, that wrecks me. And years 5 and 6, that was tough, but not so tough. Year 7, February 8th, 2023, that was awful for me. But I don't have weeks and months at a time of those awful grieving times. It comes and it goes, and it's not as bad as it was. Do I still miss him? Yes. Do I still grieve as hard? No. And it's okay to not grieve. I don't feel guilty now when I go, wow, do I miss Zane? Yes. Do I have that horrific grieving I used to have, and sense of loss and ruin and just terribleness? Do I feel guilty about that? No, I don't, because it's okay to heal from those kind of losses. So I just want to give you hope. You can battle back if you've been through something like that. So back to my journey. Losing Zane left me emotionally feeling like I had 3 lost years. From 16 to 17 and 17 to 18 and 18 to 19, those years feel like lost years to me. Now I'll explain why in a second. I'll make it clear. It's not that good things didn't happen in those 3 years. Some incredible things happened during those 3 years. 2 of them I can think of right at the top of my head. I started podcasting in 2016. Foolishly, right after Zane passed, I started podcasting, and I'd record a podcast, and it'd be a long time before I could get it released. I had one person tell me, "Hey, what about the timing of the release of that podcast?" And I'm thinking, "Don't you understand? I've been grieving and trying to heal from the loss of my son." But I'm so glad I started podcasting. It's brought a lot of joy into my life. It's been good for my professional career. So during those 3 lost years, I started podcasting. Another amazing thing happened during those 3 lost years. September 13th, 2017, I had a date at a dive bar with this incredible, beautiful woman. Shortly thereafter, she became my girlfriend, and a couple years later, she became my wife. And so I met Casey, now Casey Schaumler, during those 3 lost years. So good things did happen during those 3 lost years. But the reason I call them 3 lost years is I didn't make very much progress professionally. I didn't get any more books published. If you'd asked me in the fall of 2015, "Hey, Stephen, you're working on your 3rd book. It's going to be released. You're going to finish it, and it's going to come out in 2016. The publisher's talking with you about 4 and 5. You've already got that planned. Where do you think you will be in the fall of 2019? I would have thought I'd been way down the road, and the truth, I didn't make much progress during that time frame. By the time it was fall of 2019, and I finally felt like I had some creative energy to put back into making it happen and moving ahead with the new career that I established for myself that I absolutely loved, and continuing my life change story, I had a lot of heartache that, wow, I sure didn't get much done during those 3 lost years. But I had to be graceful to myself and kind to myself because I just didn't have it in me. And grief hits people different ways. One of the people in Zane's family, their grief led them to doing a lot of different things. It impacted them differently. They did a lot of stuff during that time frame, partially fueled by the loss of Zane. Whereas me, there just wasn't a lot I could do. And so that's why I call it those 3 lost years. But I mentioned right now, at this point in my life change story, we're at September 2019, the fall of 2019. Finally feel like I have my creative momentum back. I'm finally healed enough to start making things happen again, get back on my horse riding, having adventures, doing cool things. And what happened next? Well, that you have to go to episode 5 to find out what happened next. I will see you there.